One of the best lines I've heard about this, it's this quote about the difference between first-time and second-time founders. First-time founders obsess over product, and second-time founders, serial entrepreneurs, think distribution first.
Yes.
So you think GTM first.
Yes.
Right. A strong growth person must have a good understanding of product, marketing, and partnerships. The way I see it, all of them.
So
right? For a B2B and tech sales in general is not the picture that people have when you say sales. Right? It's not your snake oil salesperson kind of thing. Tech sales is very analytical. You really have to understand product. You have to understand how to work with internal resources. So in many ways, I think that before anything happens externally, you have to first see that in your mind. Right?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Out of Office podcast. Our next guest is a founder. He is a college opt-out and he runs the largest community of VCs and early stage founders in Singapore. He's also the growth lead at an equity management platform called Capita. And in this podcast, we discover everything from growth, business development and sales, networking, events, and most importantly, how spirituality plays into all of this to give your business outcomes. Sounds weird, right? But watch on. I'm sure you will enjoy it. See you soon. Prahlad, welcome to the Out of Office show. Thank you so much for being here. I'm super excited. Okay, I've got a lot of questions to ask you, specifically around your life, your growth in this field as a marketer, and the way you've gone ahead and built communities and all of those things, right? So there's a lot to unpack here, and we go deeper and deeper in certain topics. That Prahlad, tell me a little bit more about your journey from your early days in school to now as a growth lead at Capita. And for those who don't know, Capita is an equity management platform. It's a SaaS platform based out of Singapore.
Cool. I mean, parents from India. Grew up largely in Singapore, went to a bunch of international schools, was homeschooled for 2 different periods. I was also in 2 different boarding schools in India as a teenager.
Right.
So kind of been around. And that was childhood. So growing up, I built this edtech platform, which is basically a platform for dyslexic kids to learn in more interactive ways. That was the first time I actually built a product growing up. And
when was that? How?
This was 13.
Okay.
Back then, iPad in education was like the big thing.
Okay.
And
did you make it on your own?
Yeah, entirely. So back then, I was entirely one of those product geeks, just coding till late in the night.
Nice.
I wasn't thinking much about the other aspects of business, and the whole marketing side of things came in later. But back then I was just obsessed about building products, and that was the first time I actually built something. We shipped it to 50 plus classrooms island-wide, and you kind of get hooked to that feeling of seeing people use your products and benefit from it. And I've just always been chasing that high through all the other startups as well. So when I was 18, 19, towards the end of army is when first proper startup, that is FunWatch. It's a platform to discover movies and TV shows from multiple streaming services in one place. Made a lot of classic entrepreneurial mistakes, first time founder, and we can go into that later. But then post that, I was in marketing for a while. I was in Dentsu, one of the larger agencies, and I was also with a MarTech startup that was a unicorn back in the peak 2022-2023 ZERP era, and they had an IPO in 2023, but basically bust right now. And this whole community aspect, and the reason you have me on, started about 2.5 years ago when they relaxed the rules post-COVID in Singapore, and you could do events again and be out there. I started a podcast where I talked to founders and investors, and then that turned into doing events. It was started with monthly events outside of work while I was still at Dentsu. I just wanted to stay in touch with the startup ecosystem, although it didn't really tie into my job at the time. And then that evolved into Kurate, which was a little bit more focused on founders, as you mentioned. So Kurate is one of the more active startup communities here in Singapore. Founders and VCs, generally focused on early to mid-stage founders of tech companies, venture-backed in Singapore. So that is Kurate, and did that full-time for a while, but now it's it's still alive very much and still continue to grow it. I also have a full-time job at Capita where I lead growth. So a combination of partnership, biz dev, online marketing. And yeah, it's an exciting place to be because both with Capita and Curate, the audience that I deal with is very similar. Yeah. Founders, VCs, the startup ecosystem at large, and it's nice to have grown within that ecosystem the past few years.
So you've had a journey building a product, then going into doing marketing at Dentsu, and then after that, now today at Capita. But between this, right, from building your first product to now, you were young, right? What was going on in your mind at that point in time? What were you thinking as to what you want to do? So of course you had the high that you said when you were building the dyslexic product for dyslexic students. All that's great. So, but what did you learn from them? And then how did that define who you were going to be?
One of the best lines I've heard about this, and I forget where I heard this. It's either somebody told me or I read it in a book or I heard it on some podcast, but it's resonated with me so much and is largely how I live and breathe right now. Okay. It's this quote about the difference between first-time and second-time founders. Yeah. And it goes as follows. First-time founders obsess over product. Yeah. And second-time founders, serial entrepreneurs, think distribution first. Yes. So you think GTM first. Yes. Yes. Right. I think a lot of first-time entrepreneurs, we go into the details of every button and the UX and how everything looks, and you just feel like I need to add that one more feature, and then the product's going to change the world, right? Yeah. And you just get trapped in that cycle, and instead what you should be doing is putting it out there, getting feedback from users, and changing it on the fly, right? As opposed to waiting for that best product to be out, right? And that's been my biggest learning. So now I whenever I think of cool ideas, almost instinctively now I think about, okay, what's my distributed channels? How would I go with a partnership-led approach to get this in the hands of people? That's kind of how I'm wired right now. So at what point of your life did you learn this? Was this right after you built FunWatch? Or yeah, was it? I would say yeah. After FunWatch, just being in the ecosystem. Actually, it's really even post FunWatch, just dealing with the past few years, meeting a lot of founders like yourself. I forget one of the networking events we met at, right? And so I've met so many founders doing interesting things, and you see great products every day, right? And I've seen a lot of companies raise a certain amount of capital, go bust within 2-3 years. And this is, I see it all the time. Amazing products, great features, great understanding of the industry. But just don't have a solid approach in terms of distribution. They're not thinking big enough in terms of the markets you want to go into. This is something I noticed across Southeast Asia. In fact, India is a little different in that sense. What India, especially SaaS companies built out of India, Bangalore especially, have mastered is that they build in India and sell straight to the US. Right? They've got their distribution nailed out. That whole SaaS corridor between Bangalore and the US is very mature now. And I feel like Singapore, Southeast Asia, a lot of founders are still getting their heads around that concept. Our biggest successes have still been in the consumer world. But on the B2B side, I think without a solid partnership-led approach for your distribution, you will hit a wall with just building great products. So yeah, answering your question, it's been largely from my interaction with founders, and seeing which startups last and which don't. Okay. If you've ever used SAP, Oracle, any kind of legacy enterprise software, you know what I'm talking about. There are products that have really unintuitive UIs that are still massive companies today, right? Purely because they nailed distribution. Right. Yeah. So. Very true. In fact, one of the things that we've also had learning in the last 3 to 4 years, building so many different products and seeing them fail for different entrepreneurs, is all about the distribution, right? But was it really this learning that triggered your journey into marketing? Marketing. Well, you remember when we caught up for coffee, I showed you my YouTube channel from when I was 11, 12 years old.
Okay.
I've always been interested in content.
Yeah.
Hence been interested in marketing and understanding platforms. So that's something that I've kind of grown up with. I've always tried to put myself out there and learn. Wasn't the best student generally speaking. There were some subjects for certain periods I did well, but the one thing I really enjoyed during school was presentations.
Right.
So anytime I had an opportunity to present, I would really take that very seriously, even though it would be only 10-20% of your grade. I would act as if that's like 90% of my grade, right? So yeah, I've always had that inclination towards communication, presentations, and so as an extension, all the channels where that content will be visible. So that is kind of my basic interest into marketing, just stems from a love for content.
Okay. And of course, YouTube and all came in later, right? So as a kid, when Prahlad was 1 to 7 years old, what was the thing that you enjoyed doing most? I mean, of course, I feel, okay, so the reason why I'm asking this question is often we carry our really core attributes from those years into our work as a 20-year-old or as a 30-year-old, 40, and whichever. So we do this journey, and yeah, so what was that like for Prahlad?
Well, I mean, early on, I would say like a lot of guys, a lot of Lego.
Yeah.
A lot of Lego, a lot of building things, and never cleaning them up. So you just build it, and and that's that. And a lot of like just drawing. I would draw products and just random products. I would this A3 size papers where I would draw different products. Like today, I feel like inventing a projector, and so I would come up with this nice like slim projector. I have no idea how a thin projector would actually be built, because back then projectors were this big. But I was just like building the thinnest projector in the world. These are the features, a little diagram. Steve Jobs was a big inspiration, so that's how I got into reading itself as a habit. I think when I was 7, parents gifted this book, Inside Steve's Brain. The Steve Jobs autobiography came in much later. I think by 2013 or so is when that came out. But between that first book and his biography, I probably read about 8 to 10 books just on Steve Jobs. That's how obsessed I was. And everything that goes into the way he approaches product and creativity. Yeah. So that's probably my biggest sort of.
Okay. So tell me a little bit more about how you do marketing and growth today in Capita. Let's come back to today. Yeah.
Sure. Capita specifically, or is my approach to marketing? Capita specifically. Yeah. Capita specifically, just to set some context, we are a pre-Series B startup.
Yeah.
Started out of Singapore about 5 years ago. We've raised about 40 mil since and acquired 2 companies in India. So we have a large presence there, market leaders there. And Southeast Asia, we started here and so actually have a strong penetration in this part of the world as well.
Yeah.
And we're just breaking into the US as we speak. But essentially, as you mentioned, what we do is ESOP management for companies. So our users typically tend to be startups or tech companies, because they are the kind of companies that have a culture of giving equity away to employees and investors.
Yeah.
So our platform is one to manage the shares that you give out, the different classes of shares, all of that. We also do valuations for companies, but this is the core offering. So that's Capita. And so because of the nature of this type of a product, at least till now, our audience is extremely well defined, which is startups,
founders,
right?
and tech.
Yeah, exactly. So the early stage, it'll be the founders directly. If you are a more mature startup around Series B and above, you might have a dedicated CFO or CHRO.
Yeah.
And these are the stakeholders that we want our brand to resonate with. They are our ultimate decision makers, which is very specific, right? Even if you look at Singapore, which is where most of the action is in terms of the startup ecosystem, regionally within Southeast Asia at least. Yeah. It's a couple thousand people you're talking about. It's not a massive market.
Yeah.
Right. And so you have to have a very specific approach as to creating content, doing initiatives that actually resonate with the founder. And that is why all my experiences with the community stuff really helped and put me in a place to do this sort of a role within a company like Capita, because without really understanding what makes founders tick, it's very difficult to create content that actually resonates. In fact, in many ways, it's a tough segment to sell into, because if you think about it, founders by definition take massive risk. They've quit a safe, steady job. They've left a salary behind to start something bigger. They've probably failed multiple times before having a company grow to a certain extent, and so they really understand their business more than anyone else in the organization, and they're extremely cost conscious, right? And so that makes it quite an interesting segment to sell into, right? But back to, from a marketing standpoint, extremely specific, well defined who we're after, and so my approach to it has been aggressively engaging at a grassroots level with the founder community. And that doesn't mean just talking about our offerings, but actually being of value to them in a myriad of ways, right? That means through partnerships. How can we engage the founder community, right? In some cases, it'll be very specific workshops we do around cap table and ESOP management, but in many other cases, it may be wider ecosystem engagements. Because our product is also not something that you can just push into companies, right? It's something that when founders, when decision makers think that they need to implement this within their company, they should think of Capita as being top of mind, right? So how do you build that top of mind awareness, right? You have to be seen in the ecosystem, right? That's my personal view. And so it's
that awareness that comes with what Capita is about, right?
What's that?
So the awareness that comes with what Capita is all about, that's something that you need to build.
Correct. So in a way, my job is basically managing our inbound marketing engine, right?
So there are a couple of things. Let's break this down. Because now there are a lot of founders probably in the audience, and there are a lot of marketers who are just getting into a tech company or a SaaS company. And for them, they're probably tasked to figure out a good marketing strategy or growth for the business. So let's just really break it down into the first part. Okay, let's go into the how-tos. So what is really growth? What is the role of a growth marketer in a SaaS company?
I think in this part of the world, it's still an evolving role, just because SaaS as a space is still maturing in this part of the world. It is much more well defined in the US, I'd say.
Okay.
Especially Silicon Valley, where
so what is the definition in the US?
A strong growth person must have a good understanding of product, marketing, and partnerships. The way I see it, all of them.
So
right?
Product and then marketing of that product and the partnerships. Okay.
Right. So it's kind of a trifecta type of role, the way I see it. And yeah, to be successful in this sort of a role, I think a good understanding of multiple aspects of the business, it really helps, right?
Okay. So that's in the US. It's in Singapore and Southeast Asia. How does that definition of a growth marketer change?
It's similar. It's very similar, but I think you have to be a little bit more creative with the kind of channels that you use, right? So it's not as straightforward as just spending money on LinkedIn or Google. You really have to think about multiple channels from day one, and multiple ways to hit the same person, right? So I feel that aspect of it is a little bit more market specific, really understanding the nuances of each market, especially Southeast Asia. It's not like one homogenous market. You really have to understand within each market what are the channels that founders resonate with, or whoever your audience is. So I would say it's a little bit more tricky in this part of the world, and then there's just the overall challenge of any SaaS company in this part of the world, where the expectation when you buy software is very different. The whole process is very different in this part of the world versus the US, right? There's much more of a human element involved. Things like customer success is much more critical, right? So that's just overall differences in SaaS companies. Yeah.
Okay. So interesting. So when it comes to growth, right? What is as a growth marketer in a SaaS company, what is the overall objective or OKR, whatever you want to call it? What is that one North Star that a growth marketer needs to have?
I think within a B2B SaaS company, it should probably tie to leads and even ultimately sales, if you can do that. But at least it should be you should be measured on the amount of leads that you're generating, and of course the total brand value impressions that you're creating within the ecosystem. But ultimately, if you talk about OKRs, it's leads and sales.
Okay.
Right.
And then, in order to get that, you mentioned channels, right? And of course, there are different channels. But to a layman, what is a channel?
It's actually, it changes all the time. Right now, I would say for any B2B product, LinkedIn is the default most important channel. You can't
Even in
negate
Southeast Asia.
even Southeast Asia.
Okay.
So for SaaS products, typically yes, LinkedIn. If you're talking about more traditional industries, like while I was at Dentsu, my client was 3M, right, and we were dealing with industrial adhesives, right?
Yeah.
In that sort of a space, may or may not be LinkedIn, right?
Okay.
But if you talk about software products, yes, LinkedIn is the one channel
For
yeah.
software products.
Yeah.
So this is for B2B. For B2C, how does that change?
For B2C, it can be very different. For B2C, it's very different. I think short form video is much more critical. Really understanding how to create reel style content on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook to some extent still.
Yeah.
A lot of search marketing. So with B2C, it's really a myriad of channels. Whereas with B2B, you kind of have this luxury of going all in on one channel. With B2C, you really have to you have to be touching with different channels. Yeah.
Okay. So
and with B2B, I would say short form content. You really have to nail short form content. I would say even in B2B right now, you should be. But B2C, basic hygiene, you should be doing short form content.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's not just ads. That's just creating organic content.
Organic and more engaged,
Yeah.
engaging content. Okay. Now, when it comes down to these two, so channels, these are all online channels. So there is this element of offline to this whole thing, and I think we met through a lot of these offline events and channels. So my question is, how does that fit into a growth marketing strategy for a B2B company?
I'm a big fan of offline channels, events being the number one. Over the past 2.5 years, I've done about 30 events with a range of partners, key ecosystem players, communities, VC funds. It might be different depending on your industry, but dealing with startups, these are the usual suspects. I think it's a great way to engage people on the ground. There's a certain art and science that goes into curating events. Early on, you have to be willing to start somewhere. It's kind of similar to content, right? You have to be willing to start somewhere and get your hands dirty. And it will take quite a while before you have that brand within the ecosystem that then people flock to you. Right? But initially, you would set out with a certain goal that I want exactly this kind of a persona of people to attend my events. But it's very difficult for enough people of that persona, at least initially, to actually be attracted to your event. That comes over repetition. And I've seen so many people just start with a certain ideological thing that, I want a certain caliber of people to attend. They don't attend within 2-3 months and they give up, right? And so I feel like, and that kind of brings me on to my next point, which is events as a strategy, similar to content. If you're not actually interested in it and you're doing it purely because you think it's an effective channel, it will very quickly cease to be effective. Right? Because you are competing with people like me who would do it whether or not I'm paid for it. Right? So it's very similar to content in that sense, where if you start with the intention of monetizing, like podcasts and all of that, it's very difficult for you to reach that tipping point because it will take months and years. And those are the guys you're competing with. And so I feel with events, don't do it unless you are very clear that you're going to repeatedly engage, right? And you're willing to give it a few months, a year or so. And figure out a way to do it in a low-cost way with partners as opposed to purely relying, say, on sponsorships of other brands, right? That's one approach as well if you can afford that. But for most early-stage companies, which I would assume the audience has, I would say figure out a way to partner with people and share the load early on and just be consistent. So that's events as a strategy. It's worked amazingly well for us, but I wouldn't say it's something universal. It's very similar to content.
This is very interesting because I've also, as a founder, had these questions about the ROI of all these efforts
Yeah.
that we're putting into different channels.
Yeah.
Right? So for your socials, if you're talking about short form content, there is effort that is put into creating the content, making it. Then the same thing for LinkedIn, right? It could be outreach, it could be again content being posted there for inbound sales and so on and so forth.
Right.
Events, again, there's a whole element of planning, there's marketing for that specific event, and then engaging with people coming, everything. How does it all tie back to the main KPI of sales and revenue? And in your experience, the question is like, I guess the question is, in your experience, how have you seen this? Were you able to measure a higher ROI for certain things, or see the impact of it on direct numbers? And how much is it usually?
For sure, yeah. This is what most people miss again with events. I think if you're purely measuring those who attend your events, it'll probably be a very low number initially. It'll also be low quality. It won't be exactly who you want.
Yeah.
But with enough repetition and consistency in putting yourself out there and being seen as that node in whatever community and industry you're part of, things compound very quickly.
Okay, let's delve into this compound thing in a bit.
So for instance, a basic example, you do something, 20 people attend your event, right? Even the podcast, for instance, right? If you're purely going by the views on the videos, it'll probably be low initially. But the post that you make about it, the short form content you make about it, will probably get thousands of impressions. As long as you have a decent following. And there might be people who, and we know this from our first-hand experience, right? There are so many creators that we watch 10 short reels from, and only after that we watch their actual YouTube channel.
Yeah.
You may not even know they have a YouTube channel before that, right?
Yeah.
So very similar with events, the way I see it. When people see you consistently engage, right, with different brands, with different people, with a certain focused niche in the same ecosystem in a very local, targeted way, you will very quickly see the efforts compound. There will be enormous inbound interest in what you're up to, and it'll be a very clear.
And that will naturally go into your lead pipeline.
Absolutely. Which is why I stress the fact that figure out a way to do it in a low cost, no cost kind of a way.
So let's delve a little bit more into this, and this is interesting because we ourselves have together done a couple of events, and as innovative as well as now Footprint IQ will be doing a couple of events. So low cost way of doing it for a founder or an early stage startup, let's say. What is the strategy that you use? How do you keep it low cost and
partner with the right folks. The first 10, 12 events that I did were all at this place called Draper Startup House in Singapore. And Draper Startup House wants more entrepreneurs to know of their place. They also have a VC arm and eventually end up investing in some of the founders. So figure out a win-win kind of situation for your partners, the venue. A kind of a bit of a hack is going after up-and-coming places, right? So Draper, post-COVID, not much traffic, events were resuming, we brought in a lot of footfall. Monk's Brew, for instance, where we're doing our event in 2 weeks, they started just a year ago, we've been doing stuff with them. Mortar and Pestle is another popular one. So going after new places, you will have the advantage of them actually appreciating the audience that you bring. And the best case is that it ties exactly with the persona of people that they want to attract.
So this is something that I'm curious about. When it comes to these places, how do you choose the places? Because there are co-working spaces out there. There are really interesting co-working spaces, and there are really boring ones. Okay. And then similarly with restaurants or bars and clubs. So, what is your ideal go-to type of location in amongst these?
I think it depends. If you're representing, say, a larger brand and have more resources, then you can treat places purely as vendors, a venue, and just go with whatever fits your budget, right? And it's a very transactional kind of relationship. If you want to be more scrappy, you're strapped with resources, and you want to keep costs to the minimum, then you got to go with a proper partnership kind of approach, where you look at your venue not just as a physical space, but as a partner who is also interested in the audience that you're after. right? And you share the load in terms of promoting, creating the buzz around local communities. So that's been my approach. If you can consistently see it with all the partners that we've engaged, all the venues we've done events at. That's a common theme that you notice, that the audience that I bring, which is founders and investors and startup, is exactly aligned with the kind of audience that the place wants to attract.
So how
in which case it's a different dynamic altogether. It's a partner dynamic. It's not a vendor kind of a dynamic where it's just about cost. It becomes about how do we make this bigger for both of us involved.
Right. So it's more of a win-win collaborative way of...
That's been my approach. But again, if you have enough resources, then just go after the fanciest, best venues in town. That's great as well.
So when it comes to this collaborative approach, how do you find these places, and how do you approach them? What do you really tell them? And then eventually, what is the deliverable that you help them with for their brand awareness or whatever the KPI they?
This comes down to probably something else you had in mind, which is networking. I think it's a bit of a numbers game.
Okay.
If you're having enough conversations with enough people, things will click. If you're putting all your eggs in one basket and you're very fixated on exactly what you want, it'll be difficult to move. And then also the other person has more leverage than you because you're fixated that you want to do something.
Give me an example of this.
If you've already fixated, you want to do an event at Marina Bay Sands, then they'll charge you exactly what the space is worth.
Okay.
Right? Whereas if you're flexible and say, I'm working with partners to figure the most suitable venue, and you have conversations with 5-10 places, a much better outcome could come out of it. Where it's not just lower cost, but they might actually pull their weight and help you promote the whole thing and create buzz around it, which is actually more important as a currency than just the place. So.
Okay, so since you mentioned Draper Startup House, there are a couple more clubs that are in Singapore. There are the high-end ones, then there are the artsy ones, and there are the entrepreneur clubs. So, what are your thoughts around these? Like, have you had experiences with not just Draper Startup, but the likes of Mandala Club, for example? So, when it comes to doing events, how reciprocative are they? Is it easy to do collaborations with them?
The fancier the place, obviously the more demand there is for people to do stuff with them. But I would, by the same principle, I just, whoever I work with needs to appreciate the audience that we bring. And once that's there, it's a very different dynamic. So, and just seeing each other grow together is also interesting. Where if you're just after the most popular places, then you're going to pay top dollar. As simple as that. If you can do that, that's great. But otherwise, figure out a place that is up and coming and grow with them. Get popular together.
Okay.
Same approach with content as well. Like partner up with up and coming people. If you start a podcast and say, I want to interview whoever, like Donald Trump as your first guest, it's not going to happen, right? You could, but then they'll have a speaking fee and that's it, right? I think a much more interesting way to grow within communities is repetition and being seen with other key people in the ecosystem.
Okay.
So you can apply that to whatever industry. I think this is really the currency. I might sound like Gary Vee when I say this, but attention is really the currency right now. It's very clear that even the best content wins. So even if you put budgets behind an ad, you can't get the same visibility that you got a few years ago. The best, because the platforms just want to engage users with the best content. Right? And yes, while they slot ads in, you're competing with a bunch of other ads and other organic content. And so just getting great at being seen within the ecosystem is going to be an amazing skill.
Okay.
And that'll take a while. You just have to start somewhere.
Interesting. Okay, so we spoke about collaboration and space, right? What else goes into making a good, successful event consistently and in a more cost-effective way?
I think that's about it. Just partners, repetition, be seen.
That's about it.
Get different people involved, different speakers, different themes, different formats. Try it. Because different things will work for different industries, different things. So it's kind of like, there's this, people have heard of the terms product market fit. There is also founder market fit. Right? And so you want to make sure that whatever you're doing resonates with your style. Right? And if you can do a certain style better than others, then you should double down on that. as opposed to doing whatever the industry norm or best practice is. So for us, we've tried a range of formats from a lot of the original events were panel discussions, fireside chats, workshops also we've tried, keynote style events, mixer style events.
Yeah.
We switch between a range of formats, each one of them serve different purposes.
Yeah.
And
so which ones usually are best engaged by the audience?
Really varies. All of them depends on the content, depends on the speaker.
What are your thoughts on webinars?
Webinars. I haven't had much experience with it. I'm doing our first webinar next month. Actually, let me think. I've done LinkedIn Live, which is close to a webinar. I've done online podcasts, but a proper webinar, I think it's not as hot as it was back in, say, 2022. It's a little bit more difficult to get people to, in real time, watch something online. And a lot of people are also bombarded by these content creators who fake live webinars. So it appears live, but it's not really live. And it's like MLM marketing where they pitch something. And so people are kind of tired of that, is my overall impression. But when done right and when you don't just rely on the live component, but you actually promote the webinar, pre, post, and all of that, then as a whole, I would treat it as just any other piece of video content online. I don't see it as something unique to the webinar as a format. If you can do LinkedIn Lives, podcasts, webinars are very similar in that sense, is the way I see it.
Okay. So when it comes to content and the type of content people really want, how has that shifted since 2022? That's it.
I think a lot more people have gotten into things like events, things like podcasts, things YouTube channels. So there are, on the positive side, there are playbooks out there on exactly how to start, how to grow, and it's just a question of doing it and getting the reps in. The negative though is it's much more competitive. It's much more competitive. It's a pure game of demand and supply, and so your content is always on a relative basis competing with. Just think about the number of minutes you spend on LinkedIn on your phone. You probably look at a few posts and you're out. Right? And so everyone's competing for that.
People are more at the moment, I don't know, maybe it's just a personal thing, but people are a lot on Instagram and YouTube.
Exactly. So that's why I've always had the approach that try multiple platforms. It's again back to the founder market fit type of a thing. There might be certain ones that you can do better, and you should double down on that, even if that goes against the grain and common knowledge says your audience is actually on LinkedIn. That audience can move anytime. Right, we've seen MySpace die, we've seen Facebook boom, right? MySpace was the incumbent, people forget that. Facebook was the upstart, right? Yes. So things change all the time. Wines was a thing that died, Clubhouse was a thing that died.
Oh yeah. That's pretty
X goes through different waves, right? So platforms change. Ultimately, you're communicating with certain people that you want to resonate with. And just understanding them is the priority, and the channels are almost secondary the way I see it. So I wouldn't obsess too much about the channels until you have enough of a following and enough of a presence where then you can actually fine tune and actually hack your content depending on the channels, because then you have a mass of following where a 5% increment in if you're creating content 5% better, that's probably 50,000 more views.
Right.
Then it's worth fine tuning. But at the early stage, you should just be trying to create as many pieces of content. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
That's it.
That people or your audience.
In fact, I will even look at the data for my first, say, 20 videos. Nothing. I don't want to see any metrics. Same with LinkedIn posts. There's no point seeing metrics. It's just 10 of your friends liking your initial post.
Right.
So if you're data driven from day one, you're just gonna hit a wall. Instead, just focus on creating content, and once the numbers is in the hundreds and thousands, then you can start seeing, okay, what are the trends here? Yeah.
Interesting. So while you were talking, a couple of thoughts came into my mind, and this was really, so we spoke a lot about marketing. In general, growth marketing and all the channels that we're using to get to our audience. How is that so different from, let's say, business development and sales in an organization like SaaS? a B2B organization?
I mean, in terms of goals, BizDev is also fairly aligned in its objective to generate leads for sales, ultimately to get on calls and close.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
In a
so
B2B context.
what's the sales? So how's sales different from these? So let's say BizDev and marketing, they have the same objectives, they just do it differently.
Right. Right.
But when it comes to sales, what do they?
I would say it depends on the size of the company, right? The titles can be very misleading in this sort of domain.
Yeah.
At the early stage, say a first proper sales hire for a startup, say at the scale that you are at, the first sales hire, dedicated sales hire, would probably do everything from generating their own leads to actually getting on the calls and closing, to dealing with the product teams, to dealing with customer success, all of that. And then as your company matures, you might have a dedicated role for BizDev, generating leads.
Yeah.
That could be in the form of a BDR, a business development rep, a BDM, business development manager, an SDR, sales development rep. These things mean very similar things, right? Your objective would be to generate leads through whatever channel for the sales team to close, right? Sometimes it might also involve a round of qualification where you get on calls to make sure that the buyer is in the market right now and can afford your product, and then it goes on to the sales team. But ultimately, if the title is SDR, BDR type of things, then you're probably measured on lead gen and not the ultimate sales conversion itself, right? And then sales obviously is you get, especially with B2B products, it may take you anywhere from 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 calls to close, depending on the size of the deal.
Yeah, and that is the part that the sales team as well.
Yeah, that's sales responsibility. So a large part of B2B and tech sales in general is not the picture that people have when you say sales.
Yeah.
Right? It's not your snake oil salesperson kind of thing.
Yeah.
Tech sales is very analytical. You really have to understand product. You have to
Yeah.
understand how to work with internal resources. You have to understand what is the level of customization I can make for a customer, and where what you should push back against, all of that.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's very much objective. At the end of the day, you will be compared on a piece of paper along with 2 other vendors typically.
Yes.
For the buyers, and so it's quite an objective process as opposed to your salesy, nature would go further in more traditional industry, whereas with B2B SaaS companies, it's quite an objective process. And you're compared on a feature by feature basis, cost basis, all of that. So then the salesperson's role is to really understand what resonates with customers, to translate that in real time to internal product teams, customer success teams, tweak the product if needed, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
what has your experience been like with sales and marketing in general?
Very. So I've always been in early stage companies, and worked with a lot of early stage founders as well. Sales has always been in this stage, right? Sales is always a founder's job. There is the product, there is everything that you're building, but sales at the core is simply figuring out a way in which your customer is going to buy your product, and that could mean, as you rightly said, different ways of presenting your features and what you can do, and essentially solve the problem of the customer, right? So that's been the case. So marketing, events, and everything were ways to get more leads into your CRM, and so that's really just been my experience. But I do think that it is incredibly difficult for a single founder or 2-founder team to really do all of this. So that's where, either they have to work with a partner, they have to work with other companies to help them get through these stages of marketing. And sometimes it's just not in their forte to do marketing or any of the other things. So yeah, that's been my experience. Okay, so coming back to the question, so I wanted to know, so a lot of the salespeople, whenever they talk about being in sales, they have an understanding that, okay, I'm going to cold call, right? What is your thought about that, and does this still happen today?
Very much, yeah. I think it's one of those life skills. It's kind of like what I spoke about content.
Yeah.
What that cold calling process teaches you is enormous, right?
Mm-hmm.
You really build a certain thick skin. It's I think essential for any founder, especially if you're the CEO, the marketing sales kind of person.
Yeah.
Essential skill.
Yeah.
Whether it works or not is very industry specific, but I think just at a personal level, I've done it in phases.
Yeah.
And it's an incredibly important life skill. Like it really just teaches you a lot.
So in your role, let's say in Dentsu, did you have to?
No, I didn't. Yeah.
Okay.
So I did it in periods with my own ventures where I had to approach people when your network isn't large enough to get a warm intro.
Yeah.
You might have to do a lot of and it's not just cold calls, cold emails, cold reach outs in general. And these things also keep changing with time. So as with any marketing channel, as there's a playbook for it and as more people adopt it, then your same prospect or customer is bombarded with very similar messages. Today, on most people's LinkedIn, you'll have a bunch of sales, biz dev people reach out saying, this is what we offer, can we get on a call? And so the same method might be less effective as more people compete with that. So you have to constantly be on your toes to figure out, how do I tweak messaging? What is the right level of personalization? How do I scale this? How do I use AI tools? What is the right level of spending time and actually customizing messages versus automating the process and doing many more reach outs at the same time, right? These are things that you learn only by doing.
Yeah.
And as all your competitors do similar things, right? Whether or not they're in the same domain, as long as you're going after the same persona as a customer, right? They are bombarded with very similar messages, and you have to always figure out what is a better way to approach, what are the newer channels I can use, all of that. So same thing with cold calling, cold reach outs, cold emails, all of that. At the end of the day, it's a numbers game, but also depending on the size of your industry, you have to make sure that it's effective. And so if you're making 1,000 calls and getting one conversion, that probably isn't as great, right? So so that doesn't mean that the process is working.
Yeah.
So that is something that you'll figure only as you start.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
but answering your question, I think with everything going on in digital and AI, I would still say it's an incredibly important life skill.
But as a channel, is it still being used today?
Yes, very much.
Okay. I mean, but probably it's not literally just picking up the call and then going through the list of people, but
it could also basically be that. In fact, AI SDRs are quite a thing now.
Okay.
So I know companies that have an AI generated voice that will call you, right, and that can actually have a conversation with you. And its sole objective is to make sure that you get on the next call with a real human being. They would schedule a call with an actual person. Right. So these things it's a little nascent now, but these things it's going to pick up really fast. I think within the next 6 months we wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Not just we won't be able to tell the difference. I actually think that you would prefer speaking to an AI customer service rep or AI chatbot or an AI SDR on the phone as opposed to a human being.
Why is that?
Very simple, right? With most B2B purchases or really any product that you know enough about, you are going to have a bunch of questions about it, right? And especially customer service reps, I think they'd be the first to be affected with this whole AI wave. You would just prefer someone who can give you all the answers to any question you have, right? Who basically has access to the entire wiki of the company, all the past thousands of questions that people have asked and how to respond, and what works better, what doesn't, as opposed to dealing with a human being who may have just started yesterday at the company. So I think we would almost crave that it is
and that information.
It would just become like comparing yellow books and Google today.
Yeah. But I also think that could be a little scary.
Very much.
Not so much for the people or the receiver, but more for the company, because there could be a lot of things. It all depends on how you train the AI. But as a human, you have that sense, the common sense of what to say and what to not.
So you and Michelle have worked on innovative bunch of clients, built different products, and now you're largely working on Footprint IQ, and what is your overall view on AI? How are you incorporating it? Which parts of it are you incorporating? Which parts of it are you concerned about? What's your overall take on AI?
I definitely think AI is here to make our lives very, very easy. On a on many levels. So the one way that I have seen is it's made us very productive. So what I could do, and I need the product even for IQ. So what I could do with 5 to 6 engineers today, I'm able to do it with 3, and even lesser. I started off with just 2. So it's actually a really good thing for founders who want to get started, and if they want to build a product. If you know how to use these tools, then it is great, right? Now, talking about how we're incorporating AI into our product, largely when it comes to generative AI specifically, right? There is the whole inference element of it. So again, we work with manufacturers. Manufacturers are not necessarily ESG consultants. They are not necessarily data analysts. They are not necessarily people who know all of these things. They are just good at manufacturing whatever they're manufacturing, and their processes. They're supposed to be good just at that, right? So, but they need data. They need to be able to understand this to be able to do their job better. So where we are coming in, or how we're using AI, is to be that data analyst for them, or to be that ESG consultant for them, so that they can look at the data and then AI is being able to infer things and tell them what to do, or suggest certain recommendations, which makes their jobs again easier. So all in all, AI is there to make our lives easier if we are able to use this better. Will it reduce the numbers of people needed, people lose their jobs? Of course, it has always happened with every technological revolution. But that also means that you are doing something more meaningful when it comes to it.
Cool. So you have a net optimistic.
Oh, I definitely have a much more optimistic thing towards it. Yeah. Okay. I want to move into our conversation into more to the networking element of it.
Oh yeah.
Right. Okay. Now we all know what networking is, right? But let's try to go a little bit more simple as to why should people network. Let's start.
I love it. Why should people network?
Or should people network?
I think in any business that you're in, you're dealing with people. So you're dealing with people internally, you're dealing with customers externally, your partners, vendors, regulators, depending on the industry. You're in any business, you are in the people business. And this again goes back to the founder market fit type of a theme, which is you can only force it to a certain extent, right? So if it's really not for you, it's not for you, and you might be much better at being behind the scenes, creating great content. And so I think at a very basic level, you have to in some way enjoy being with people, right? That doesn't mean you have to be extremely extroverted like myself. You could be an introvert and still enjoy that, right?
Yeah.
I think people are they bracket these terms often together. But I know amazing introverts who are great speakers, who are great in any social setting, right? An introvert just fundamentally means you get your energy by being with yourself, right? It's a net expenditure of energy for you to be with people, whereas for an extrovert, it's a net gain of energy by being with people, right? That doesn't mean anything about how good or bad you are at it, right? So there are a lot of introverts that set aside a certain time for networking, and they're in a different mode in that time, right? Because of the value it brings. So now answering your question, I think in any business that you're in the people business. By knowing people, especially early on, right? As you mature in any space, you can have the luxury to be more selective with your time, and you should be.
Yeah.
But especially early on, I think it doesn't hurt at all to be out there, be seen, and be with people in a similar space. And that can mean different formats, different avenues. But it's played an incredible role in my life. I think every major milestone professionally can be traced back to some spontaneous interaction with someone a number of months or years ago.
So it's never like a logical 1 + 1 = 2 kind of a thing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
In terms of like your return or whatever you want to call it.
I mean, you can if you're good at that approach, it might work. But generally speaking, if the idea is I shake hands with you and it's just a transactional thing, that's all it is. People see through that, right?
Right.
So it really depends on your approach. Depends on what stage you are at, right?
Okay.
I think early on it's great to have a wide approach, and then whenever the time is right, you can be more selective with where you want to spend your time.
Okay. So, from your experience, what are the good do's in while you network and build your network? What should you do to make it meaningful? Because you could go to a whole bunch of networking events and exchange cards and then come back and forget about it. That's also called networking in the definition of a lot of people.
That's probably the image people have in mind when you say networking. Interestingly, I've never had a business card, not one. Never had a business card. I am not a fan of business cards because, at least early on, I didn't know anyone in the space. So during my first startup, I didn't know anybody who's a founder or investor. I just started and then realized I should know people in the space, and I put myself out there. So in short, I needed them more than they needed me. Okay.
Yeah.
So in that sort of a dynamic, when you give out a card, there's no guarantee that the other person will reach out back to you. Right? So purely, just selfishly, right? Initially, I want to make sure that I really get your contact, your phone, your email, whatever it is, right? And the way that happens is by either you giving me a card or us actually exchanging one or connecting online. But it certainly doesn't happen by me handing out the card and walking away.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's just one. That was the initial motivation behind not having a card. Right? If it's truly an exchange business card like the Japanese kind of practice, that's great. You're actually exchanging, but if it's just giving out cards, and we all know these kind of people who are, and they're banned from my events, by the way. People who just go around and exchange, not even exchange, they just hand out cards. This is the insurance I sell. This is the real estate I sell, and that's it, right? Yeah. We all know this kind of people.
Insurance agents, they bombard events.
Exactly, right? So that practice I'm not a big fan of. In fact, the modern version of that is people taking out their phones and saying, "Scan my LinkedIn."
Yeah.
You haven't even had a conversation yet.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'm not a big fan of the scan LinkedIn of business cards.
Yeah.
Until you've had an interesting enough conversation that this comes up naturally.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
That's been my approach.
So that is the exchange part.
Yeah.
Right. But you go in and then you start having a conversation.
Yeah.
Now for that moment, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
And you probably don't know when you're going to talk to this person next. So how do you keep in touch with?
Very good question. Yeah, good question. In fact, there are a couple of articles on how to keep in touch with people at scale, literally, right? It's not a bad idea to have like a personal CRM, right? In many ways, that could be the same as your business CRM, but like a networking CRM, right? Where you actually track who all you met, when you met them, and exactly a few months, few weeks later, you have certain reminders to keep in touch, right? As with all of the other marketing channels, if everyone is doing this, it will cease to work. But as where we're at right now, it's still an effective channel, right? My personal approach, especially in a B2B context, is staying relevant by giving some sort of value. Right? Being up to date with your industry's trends, what's happening, news in the space, right, is incredibly important, because then you can basically start a conversation with people by saying, "Hey, I read this great article," right? If you're in the banking space, be up to date with the latest news, who is the latest CEO at major banks, send that to people, start a conversation. I thought you might find this relevant. I literally did this for a great, like a PDF I got about startups and how to evaluate traction. It's basically a bunch of metrics. And I got it from a random friend, and I forwarded it to about 30 people that I selected. And that's really a great way to keep in touch, as opposed to saying, hey, what's up? You're actually just giving something of value straight away.
Yeah.
I found, and it just people
And
feel.
it's literally just sending a message,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So in your case,
It's not any fancy newsletter.
just think about what I did last week, right? I came across the carbon credits related event.
Yeah.
I looked through my entire LinkedIn. I had a short list of about 10 people I need to send this to. You were one of them.
Yeah.
Because it's something relevant to you.
Yes.
And that's an indirect way to keep in touch, as opposed to saying, hey, what's up? How are you?
Yeah.
People's usual answers to those questions will be good. I'm great. Fine. I'm fine. This has been my approach, and it works pretty well.
Now I want to touch on a very interesting thing that happens, and it's happened to me.
Okay.
So you can go ahead and you can okay. So this is, to some people, this is effort still, right?
Yeah.
Maintaining this, knowing what really matters to them.
Yeah.
Right, and probably having a log somewhere of the conversation that you've had, what was interesting and what would be of value to them. This is effort. Going and sending this over, also effort. Now you can do that and you can keep doing it, but after some point in time, what happens is people start asking this question: okay, now when do I get my return?
Yeah.
Right. I know it's a transactional point of view, but I feel like as humans, this happens, especially if you are a person who's attuned to giving, and in your personal life you are a giver.
Yeah.
Right? And then you reach that point in time where you're like, I'm done giving. What do I get out of this?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So how do you manage that?
Mm-hmm.
So that's my question. How do you manage that? At what point in time, you feel like, okay, it's helped me in some way?
See, we'll all go through phases where you'll be occupied with different things and may not have as much time literally to put yourself out there, right?
Yeah.
I think in the early stage of anyone's journey in a new industry, career, whatever, you should be investing that time.
Yeah.
But there'll be many phases later where you're just all in on, say, in your case, building product, where you don't see the world for 60 days, or you're just like a digital nomad focused on what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
So we'll all go through phases. I don't think that it should be as linear as it sounds, right? And so that's natural. I think from an ROI standpoint, see, it's very similar to what I said about content. You will always be behind someone who does it. I wouldn't say naturally, but does it consistently and does it in a more in a more committed way, essentially, right? You will always be behind, right? And so I have personally not really approached this from an ROI standpoint, but it has led to something. It has led to an enormous ROI. It's kind of like the initial content thing, right? Like I would not track data, as I said, for the first 20 videos we put out. Very similar with events, networking in general. Okay. Unless you've gone to 20, 30 events and you already have a thesis on whether the channel's working or not. I mean, I think it's juvenile basically, right? It's if you've gone for enough, I'll take what you're saying seriously. But if you've shook hands properly, had a conversation with 100 people, I'll be really surprised if you at least haven't found a friend out of this whole process. So in many ways, it's a numbers game initially, and then as you have sort of your circle that's being built out, you can be much more selective about who gets into that circles, and people automatically self-invite, self-police that circle. Yeah. But if you don't even have that circle, right, you have to invest in building that. That's it. So until then, I wouldn't bother about ROI or any data as to the number of events I'm going to, number of people I'm meeting.
Yeah.
Irrelevant.
For sure.
I would just take it as, instead of watching 2 hours of Netflix, I'm out.
Yeah.
That's the way I've always looked at
it. Very interesting. But then you said that things have led to things.
Yeah.
Right? Can you give us an example of this? Anything. It could be getting a job. It could be
it is basically getting a job.
whichever.
It is. It is the latest example is getting a job with Capita.
Yeah.
I've known the team for about 2 years now.
So tell me, how did this happen? Because I want to delve a little bit more onto this. Actually, it all ties back to this compounding thing that you've told about, and that is not a very logical 1 + 1 2 thing. So let's go deeper into this. Yeah. Give me the example. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, with the Capita's case, the first person I met was at the time he was heading Southeast Asia for the business, and we met about 2 years ago. Since then, I've met more people in the team. They started coming for a lot of the Curate events because the audience is the same, right? Founders and investors that they wanted to meet.
Yeah.
And so basically knew about half the team over here in Singapore. And it was when the opportunity came up, we've been talking for a while, but when the opportunity came up, it was a relatively fast process because they had already seen me be out there. We had enough touch points, interaction. So a lot of the basic stuff around a person's integrity.
So when you say opportunity came up, how did that happen? They initiated, or what happened there exactly?
They created a job opportunity.
Okay. So there was a need for them to invest in a growth marketer, and they put it up as a job opportunity. But somehow that came to you.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
They sent me a link.
Okay.
Yeah.
But why do you think they thought of you?
Presence in the ecosystem. I can't think of anything else. In fact, it definitely wasn't my resume, right?
Okay.
The Dentsu experience, working with the Martech unicorn. I don't think it's anything else in my resume. It's purely presence in the ecosystem. He'd be a good fit for the role. Let's see if he's interested. That's it. That was the process. Yeah.
So in a way, this is serendipity.
It is. It is.
It's purely that.
Yeah.
And so going back to the question, why should you network? You're just increasing your chances or probability or whatever it is to have more serendipitous encounters. And that leads to whatever you want it to be.
Precisely.
Right?
Yep. It's an art game. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is actually very interesting because this directly ties back to the theories about spirituality and manifestation and things like that.
All right, we're going there.
So I don't know. So actually, we've never had this conversation.
Let's go.
I really don't know how spiritual you are, Prahlad. As a person, I am very much so. But let's explore this. So tell me.
I want to start with you.
About what?
What got you into the whole spiritual side? Was it a book, a person?
No, it was really this whole serendipitous encounters that we just broke down, right? Yeah, you're putting on this effort, growth, marketing, channels, all of this tactical stuff.
Yep.
But eventually the return that comes, you can never draw a straight line back to that you wrote this email on this day, so this happened. It's never this. And that actually got me into linking business outcomes with the spiritual aspect of things.
Okay.
And the spiritual aspect of things happened much earlier as I was a kid. And
what was that?
I mean, okay, so as a kid, of course, you're growing up and you have a lot of questions about why you're here, what are you doing, why do I need to pray to God, why all of that, right? And you are essentially finding answers. You're asking questions, finding answers. So answers naturally come in this whole space. Answers will always come to you. So answers came to me in the form of books, in the form of spiritual gurus and people in different ways, and now even in the form of friends. It's that close, in the form of friends, in the form of partner and everyone, right? About how in a way you are creating your reality and you are influencing it much more massively than you think. So my journey started off like that. Then I was able to use that to generate business outcomes. And then eventually went into the physics and the meta of it. So all of that has been explored.
Oh yeah.
But that's my side. But what about yours? Where are you when it comes to what are your thoughts in this space? And I think this is very deeply personal. So
yeah, I think growing up was always an interest. read a lot, listened to a lot,
Yeah.
went to a number of these, not just yoga, but actual spiritual retreats, multiple organizations. So kind of got a taste of that growing up. My overall view on it is it plays a very important role. I think, in fact, most people forget that wealth itself is not money. Wealth just literally means abundance.
Yeah.
Right. So you can have wealth of anything.
Yeah.
Right. And that sort of an abundance mindset comes from a spiritual place
Yes,
for most people.
absolutely.
So in many ways, I think that before anything happens externally, you have to first see that in your mind, right? The whole law of attraction kind of aspect of that, but also just everything can be traced back of you having control over your mind, mastery over your own mind, right? Which is a spiritual process. So whatever that the practice is that you're doing, right? Whatever the tradition is, it's ultimately to gain control of your own mind, to hone it in a certain direction, to get your physical reality to match what your visions are, right? So I think any and this brings me on to my next point, which is my overall view is I really enjoy listening to people who are able to combine material success with spiritual concepts. The most common mistake I see people make is two separate things. And so it becomes very unappealing for ambitious people like us, right? If you are shitting on material success, right? So the people who combine that very well are generally appealing to me, at least. Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, I do not know any spiritual leader or spiritual person who's not abundant, unless they're not abundant by choice, which is different. But yeah, as you rightly said, wealth is energy. It is, and it is a form of energy. So abundance of that is what you try. But okay, so speaking about this in your life, tell us a little bit more about how you used these. It could be techniques, or it could just be experiences that you've had that has resulted in more serendipitous adventures and the reality that you've created.
It's just investing the time in whatever at that time you're most interested in, right? When you're consuming enough content about the space, when you're talking to enough people about a certain topic, when you're reading enough, listening enough, doing enough, the right things will happen. It's actually fairly mathematical, right? If you're thinking about something all the time and you're just immersed in it, as you say, then it would lead to insights that you probably wouldn't otherwise have thought of. So,
give an example of something like that.
Whenever I'm interested in a new topic, I listen to a bunch of podcasts on it. I go to Amazon, see the top books on it, buy a few books on a new topic, maybe a course or two, talk to people in the space, and just immerse myself. With AI, I've been trying to learn much more, right? I feel I'm quite out of touch with the whole product side of things, so I want to get back in that. So I think whatever it is, a certain level of focus and immersion. And I'm very acutely aware of the times where I'm not as focused and the mind is, your attention is spread out with a bunch of things, right? You're less likely to have those insights if you're not actually thinking about it all the time. So,
yeah.
So it changes depending on the time. For me right now, it's probably something like AI, thinking about the different markets that we're involved in. Going to Indonesia next week, so really understanding what makes people take over there versus here, sort of thing.
Okay. So do you usually have some sort of a practice that you do? And it could be something as simple as meditatively washing dishes, for example.
Yeah.
But do you have some sort of a practice that you do where you're able to spend some time to visualize and create what you want in your life?
I mean, there are phases where I've done that deliberately. At the moment, not really.
Okay.
I would say before even doing specific spiritual processes, there's like a lot that most of us can do to eliminate negative influences and distractions.
Interesting.
Right?
What are these?
Simple things like a lot of people I know right now have grayscale on their phone. Grayscale is a black and white view, right? Just by not having color on your phone, you will spend as much as 50% less time on your phone, right? And it's well documented because it leads to the dopamine spike isn't as prominent when you're consuming content without color, right? So just by, I think, working on a lot of those, eliminating distractions itself is a massive step, and we're all aware that certain phases you're not fully doing that. And so even before the practices, I'd say I'm more obsessed about this part of things, where I know if I can just get the right things out of my way, you'll automatically be focused, right? In fact, this is an interesting one I heard recently. What do you think the opposite of distraction is?
Focus.
Yeah, focus is our go-to term, but actually the opposite of distraction is attraction. If you're actually attracted and immersed in what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right? That's the flow state, as people call it.
Yeah.
Which is one of my favorite books, by the way.
So would you say that being in the flow state is a form of meditation?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But there is also a part where being in the flow state is you participating in your reality, doing something, right? You're participating. Yes, your mind is probably releasing the kind of waves that you would be when you are meditating, but being in the flow state is still you doing something in reality. Are there times where you completely don't participate in your reality and you're only spending time to create it?
There are phases where I've diligently done it. I've not been meditating for quite a while.
And how has that? How does that impact versus not doing it?
Similar to my first one, I think it really helps, but I think most people are not struggling with that, how to do meditation properly. Most people are just struggling with this elimination of distractions. So that's what I'm more focused on. Yeah.
Very interesting.
So simple things like time, like I use every social channel, right? I'm not a big fan of TikTok, but I still spend time on it to understand it as a medium.
Yeah.
I love Instagram Reels. It's kind of personalized to exactly what I like. LinkedIn, obviously I spend a lot of time. What I do is time box these things, right? And now there are tools on most phones to do this. But just knowing that you're not going more than half an hour a day on a certain app is better than not even knowing your limit, because it can be much more than what you make it out to be.
Nice.
Right? Just the number the number of times we pick up our phones for the average person is around 200-300 times a day. You don't realize that, right? But it adds up. So time boxing things like social media has been a good practice for me. I'm averse to this idea that we should cut it out totally. I've done that in phases, but I think there are better systems. I don't think there's anything intrinsically good or bad about these platforms. It's about the content that you're consuming and creating. And so if you're watching shit, it's going to serve you more shit. And if you've trained it to serve you good content, it'll serve you much more of that. The platform just wants you to be engaged. That's it.
And as a part of your role, does it requires you to be attuned to these platforms, the content that is there, and things like that, as compared to an average consumer, where it's just not their job. They're probably just writing code during the day, and then it's coming back, and they're looking for something entertaining, something that can help them become better, or just cat videos and dog videos. So for them, I think
I like dog videos as well.
Yeah, they're very I also love them. But yeah, for them, social media is different compared to you and compared to every other growth marketer probably out there. So I guess these tactics are genuinely very helpful in also cutting the distraction, but also doing your job better. It increases the productivity.
Another thing I do occasionally is go a day or two without my phone entirely. Right? You could still have these days. You can have WhatsApp open on your Mac. And the email is anyways on your computer. All your work stuff's on the computer.
So you're only on it when you're working.
What's that?
You're only on it when you're working.
The phone.
WhatsApp and stuff.
If needed. I'm saying you're not totally cut off. But I would go a day intentionally leaving my phone at home.
And how do those days feel?
Great, amazing.
Does it help you recharge?
Yeah, it certainly does.
This is interesting. So, going back to the spiritual part of things, what are your thoughts on law of attraction and these kind of new age ideas? Maybe not really new age anymore.
Yeah, I mean, don't have a very strong view on it. I think just reading widely, the different people resonate with different things. Law of attraction is amazing. Law of action also works incredibly well. So when combined, I think
yeah. I would like to understand a little bit more about what is next for Prahlad Jaya in life, in work, and however you envision it. What is next for you?
What's next? Just continue to embed myself deeply in the startup ecosystem. Love it, very exciting. I guess it'll be really understanding newer markets. I've spent a lot of time in Singapore, and I'm getting the opportunity to spend more time outside as well. Understanding those nuances has been amazing, starting with a regional level, but eventually global as well. So that has been very exciting.
Okay.
Yeah. And just I think overall, since we spoke about networking, just the maturing of relationships has been also very interesting to watch. Like we've known each other for what, 2 years now, 2-3 years.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely.
And just seeing how relationships evolve, people evolve, and yeah, that's been a very beautiful process. Like some connections that I made a few years ago, they're all finally now coming together. We're doing stuff together.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's been very exciting to see that we all have matured in our own spaces over the years. And finally thinking of each other, collaborating, and that's been very nice. And that's literally what's called network effects, right?
Yeah.
And that's in many ways what makes Silicon Valley what it is for us. It's this network effects of people helping people.
Yeah.
So that just concentration of people in a certain space, physically together, whatever it is, just leads to interesting outcomes over a long period. And I'm going through that in this, at least the startup ecosystem. And so that's been amazing, just seeing how relationships evolve. And
yeah. So to conclude, at the core of everything is good relationships and the journey that you take with individual people, and of course your mindset that eventually creates more serendipitous adventures. Great. Well, this I believe is just the first one. Thank you so much, Jaya.
All right.
For coming to this show.
Okay.
And we'll see you soon again.
All right.